you ever asked why some materials are called organic? Hi, this is teacher Geraldine Rosales and welcome to our science class. Look at the pictures. Can you tell which are considered organic and which are not? All of the objects are considered organic except the rocks, the house, and water. The term organic describes chemical compounds that contain carbon and other elements such as hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, sulfur, or phosphorus. All organisms, even bacteria, contain carbon-based compounds, making them organic. And the term organic compound was coined by Berzelius in 1807. Just remember, organic compounds are chemical compounds that contain carbon and hydrogen atoms. On the flip side, inorganic compounds do not contain both carbon and hydrogen atoms in them. So if you look at a chemical formula of an organic compound, the formula will have a C and it will also have an H. It doesn't mean that it is only limited to two types of atoms, but they have to have at least carbon and hydrogen in the formula. So we're going to look at some types of organic compounds that are known. There are 4 general classes of organic compounds in the living environment. They are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. For each type, we're going to discuss 4 main things: the elements or the types of atoms found in that organic compound. We're going to discuss the building blocks, some examples, and the uses in organisms. The first type of organic compound that we're going to be talking about are the carbohydrates. I start with carbohydrates because carbohydrates are the largest class of organic compounds found in organisms. You've probably heard that word before. And what do you think of when you hear the word carbohydrates? Sweet things. You're right. The elements that are found in a carbohydrate molecule include carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Those are the only atoms that you'll see. So when you look at a chemical formula for carbohydrate, you'll only see 3 types of elements in it. One example of carbohydrate is glucose. Its chemical formula is C6H12O6. Another thing that you can notice when you look at the chemical formula of a carbohydrate, the ratio of hydrogen to oxygen atom is always 2:1. In our example, glucose, when you look at the ratio of hydrogen to oxygen atom, it was 12:6. If you reduce down, you'll get the ratio 2:1. Remember your math lesson? To reduce, you need to get the GCF, or the greatest common factor, and then divide this 12 and 6 by the GCF, which is 6, to get 2:1. The building blocks of carbohydrates are called simple sugars. Simple sugars are put together or linked together to form a carbohydrate compound. There are 3 main types of carbohydrates. There are monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. Mono. Do you know what mono means? Mono means one. And the root word saccharide is another term for sugar. So the first class of carbohydrates, the monosaccharides, include glucose, fructose, and galactose. Many of you have heard of glucose that we used as an example before. It's one of the main simple sugars that we have. The other one is fructose. Think about the word even sounds like. Do you know where fructose is found? Fructose is found in fruits. That's the sugar that's naturally found in fruits. Galactose. Galactose is a monosaccharide that can be found in some plants and in milk. The second class are the disaccharides. Can you think of what di means? In this case, di means 2. If we put 2 monosaccharides together, in a simple reaction, we'll get a disaccharide or two simple sugars put together. Common examples of disaccharides are maltose, sucrose, and lactose. Maltose is made up of two glucose molecules. Sucrose is our common table sugar that we use to put in things like coffee and tea. And it's composed of a glucose molecule and fructose. Lactose is only found in milk and dairy products. And lactose is made up of glucose molecule and the galactose molecule. The third class of carbohydrates are the polysaccharides. Maybe you know what poly means. Can you remember? Poly means two or more. But in this case, we're going to talk about three or more actually. So polysaccharides will have at least three sugars put together. A lot of plants that you probably eat in terms of vegetables, you're actually eating that plant stored energy source in terms of starch. Cellulose. Cellulose makes up the cell wall in plants. Chitin and glycogen. Now, chitin makes up the exoskeleton or the outer skeleton of things like lobsters, crabs, and shrimp. And glycogen is what you store some extra carbohydrates in their liver as a quick energy reserve. The uses of carbohydrates in organisms pretty vary. The main thing that we talk about with carbohydrates is that most organisms use it as a primary fuel or their main energy source. And carbohydrates are also used as structural units. Let's move on. After carbohydrates, we can talk about lipids. Lipid is another class of organic compounds. The elements that we find in lipids are actually the same as carbohydrates. You can see that lipids only have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atom. But one of the ways to tell the difference between a lipid and a carbohydrate, if you're looking at a chemical formula, is that instead of the ratio of hydrogen and oxygen being 2:1, as it was in the carbohydrates, it is now going to be greater than 2:1. One of the reasons for that is we use lipids as energy source, stored energy. And lipids have building blocks of fatty acids and glycerols. Those fatty acids are just really long chains of carbon and hydrogen molecules, and every time we break those bonds, we release some energy. There are three main examples or types of lipids. Triglycerides that include fats, oils, and waxes. Certain fatty acids have one or more double bonds in their molecules. Fats that include these molecules are unsaturated fats. Other fatty acids have no double bonds. Fats that include these fatty acids are saturated fats. In most human health situations, the consumption of unsaturated fats is preferred to the consumption of saturated fats. Saturated fats are solid at room temperature and bad for you, while unsaturated fats are liquid at room temperature and are better for you. Some examples are steroids, which are produced by some glands and gonads in our body. And the third one is the phospholipids. They are found in cell membrane. Now, energy storage is one of the uses of lipids in organisms. Lipids are also used as building structures or to build structures, and lipids signal molecules to help the cells communicate with each other. And another function of lipid in organism is that it functions as waterproof covering. For plants, they have what we call the cuticle. It's a waxy layer that helps them to become waterproof. It also reminds me of the ears, the earwax. Earwax is waterproof, and that helps to protect our inner ear from dust and other dirt. The next main thing that we talk about with organic compounds as an example are proteins. That's the third type. Many of you have heard of proteins, and what do you think of when you hear the word proteins? Many people think of muscles. There are other things that proteins make up in our bodies besides muscle. We'll get to those in a second. We need to talk about elements first. You notice we now have new addition to our elements instead of just having carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. We now have a new element added, and that's nitrogen. And that is what the N is, nitrogen. If you look at the word protein, there's N. So you remember that that's the organic compound that has nitrogen in it. Now, the building blocks for proteins got to be more complex. The building blocks of proteins are amino acids. In case of living organisms, there are 20 different kinds of amino acids. Now, the examples of proteins are hormones that are chemical messengers like insulin, enzymes, keratin in hair and nails, antibodies for immunity. If you encounter some sort of an organism that can cause disease in your body, your immune system is going to fight that off with things called antibodies, and because antibodies are made up of proteins. Collagen in bones, skin, muscles, and hair. Now, proteins are used to build structure and to catalyze biochemical reactions for immune system, and also the proteins package and transport materials help replicate genetic material. Our very last organic compound type that we are going to discuss are the nucleic acids. Nucleic acids are probably a new word that maybe some of you haven't necessarily heard before, but once we start discussing them, I'm sure you'll recognize what they are. The elements found in nucleic acids, you notice, are now a little different than the others. We have that base carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. We have nitrogen like we did in proteins, and now there's a new one, which is P. And what element does P symbolize? P is for phosphorus. Phosphorus comes in because the building blocks of nucleic acids are something called nucleotides. To build a nucleic acid, we're going to string along and attach nucleotides together. Now, the examples of nucleic acids are RNA and DNA. RNA stands for ribonucleic acid. RNA has the ribo part, stands for the type of sugar that is used, which is in this case is called ribose. DNA, which stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, has a sugar that is called deoxyribose. Now, the uses of nucleic acids. Nucleic acids direct and store information for reproduction and cellular growth. The function of RNA is for protein synthesis, and the function of DNA is for hereditary information. That is the way we pass on our traits to our offspring. The nucleic acid that is used for that is DNA. So that's it for all our organic compounds. So remember, there are 4 main classes of organic compounds in the body. We have carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Try to find some sort of a way to remember all those things as you go on of your learning tasks. Now, for our next activity, you are going to perform learning tasks 1 and 2 found on page 31 of Pivot 4A Science 9 module. I'll give you 10 minutes to perform the 2 tasks. You may now start. I'd like you to check your own answers and see for yourself if you have learned something from our discussion today. Please check your own answers. Here are the Learning Task 1 answers. Organisms use carbohydrates as energy sources, structural units, and for other purposes, and are the largest class of organic compounds found in organisms. Number 2, the organic compound in our cells that direct and store information for reproduction and cellular growth are nucleic acids. Number 3, the organic compounds used for energy storage to build structures and as signals molecules to help cells communicate with each other are lipids. And number 4, the organic compounds used to build structure, catalyze biochemical reactions for immune response, to package and transport materials, and to help replicate genetic material are proteins. Next, here are the Learning Task 2 answers. Sugar cubes are carbohydrates. Number 2, wheat bread contains more of carbohydrates. Number 3, a melted butter is an example of lipid. Ribonucleic acid is RNA. It is an example of nucleic acid. Number 5, virgin coconut oil is an example of lipid. Number 6, deoxyribonucleic acid is DNA, so it's an example of nucleic acid. Number 7, hair and nails that contain keratin are classified as protein. Number 8, an insulin needed by a diabetic patient is an example of protein. Number 9, sweet extracted juice from fresh pineapple contains carbohydrates. And lastly, number 10, earwax that protects insides of human ears is classified as lipid. Did you get more correct answers? And for your quiz today, please read and answer the questions in the best way you can. Choose the letter of your answer. Write your answers on a piece of paper. I'll give you 10 minutes to answer the quiz. You may start now. Please keep your paper for submission. If you want to check your answers in today's quiz, you may take the automated quiz using the link posted on your science Facebook group and submit your answers or your response. Did you know that alcohol is an organic compound? Don't forget to sanitize your hands or wash your hands frequently with soap and water. Can you name some examples of lipids found at home? Please write down at least 5 examples of lipids on your paper. You may also write your reflections by answering these questions. Please write down your answers. You may also answer enrichment activity and reflection using the same link. I hope that this simple video has helped you recognize the general classes and uses of organic compounds. And don't forget to never stop asking questions.